Hey Robin, how are you?
Hi, Erin. I'm doing really great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I'm so glad to have you on the show. So, I think you are our first fabric quilting artist. You are a fabric designer and a quilt pattern maker. But I found out something when we were talking a while back about you having your start in media. And so I'm really curious, how did you find your artistic voice? How did you come to this space where you went from a virtual world to a very hands-on world?
Um, yes, thank you. I have had kind of a unique, path with things. I went to school for design as a kid. I always wanted to be an artist. And when I was at school, I went to the University of Michigan School of Art. I did graphic design and industrial design with the intention of doing, graphics after school. And I did an internship at a television station in Detroit. And so
Cool.
that gave me experience doing broadcast graphics. It was right at this time when they had new technology and new computers in. And so then I went back the following summer and I did news graphics for a whole summer. So I kind of got experience on the job through this internship, which pointed me in that direction, even though that really wasn't my initial, um, my initial intent was not to go into broadcast, but I got this
Right.
experience. And then when I moved to Chicago, I already had the experience on that specific computer system for the broadcast work. So that's when I started working for like ABC and CBS and Fox. And, that kind of started off with this 20 plus career doing television graphics.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. But then somehow, after 20 years and a very successful career in television and media graphics, you turned to quilting?
Yeah, it's definitely quite a transition because I moved to Los Angeles to be the art director at KCBS, and then I went to work for a division of Warner Brothers, where I was the supervisor in charge of all graphics there. And I found out that I was spending a lot of time in meetings and overseeing other people. And my real love is being a designer. I like designing things. So at the time when I left that full-time job, I was just starting to, have my kids. I had just had my second child. And I wanted to do freelance. So then I started doing freelance work for E Entertainment Network. So I still did broadcast design for a bunch of years, but then I did it freelance while I
Hmm.
also had my family. And so during that time, it was kind of like this creative exploration of, what else do I want to do? Because I didn't really feel like that was my main thing. I had been interested in doing children's books, and I had all these other areas of design that felt more personal to me that I wanted to
Yeah.
explore. And my mother was here on a visit, and we took she's the quilter in the family, and
Okay.
so we took a class together at a quilt shop that was in Newbury Park at the time, called the Quilter Studio. And we went to take this class, and I saw all these beautiful fabrics there. Plus, I've been to a million quilt shops with my mom and through the years, seeing the shows and things. And so I was quite exposed to that world, even though I wasn't a quilter. And that was like the moment when it really clicked in my head, like, who gets to design these fabrics? Because
Ah,
like these are really beautiful. So I started doing some research, and that's when I started taking weekend classes at Otis School of Art and Design in Los Angeles in surface design. And so they
really?
talked about the surface design being not just for fabric, but also for
Uh-huh.
like design for dishware and for let's say home decor and all these different categories that
Right.
people traditionally license artwork into. And since I was interested in the kids books and I was doing all this illustration work on the side, I also started submitting things for greeting cards. And so I started working with papyrus. And so then that's when I started kind of transitioning into art licensing and creating art for that, because I could also do it, on the side.
Yeah.
Um,
All right, I got to
and
ask you a question. Maybe it's rude, but how old were you when you went back to this school and started transitioning from media to art licensing?
I don't think that's rude.
Good. Thank you.
I was in my early 40s.
Cool. Gives me hope.
Yeah. I was in my early 40s. So I think that um, I feel like life is a continual experience of learning things. And so,
Totally.
even now, every project that I get, I might look at something and think, I might go ahead and do that solo long because I'm going to build my skill set. I'm going to learn some things doing that I don't know yet.
Yeah.
So I'm always looking for ways to increase my learning on
Yeah.
stuff.
What's a
And
sew
so
along, Robin? I don't even know
Hmm?
what a sew along is. What is a sew along?
Well, a lot of times on Instagram and on Facebook, there will be groups where somebody's doing a sew along where you all get a pattern, and you're doing like a block a week and then you post it and you share it on social media. Or I had just done a sew along with Moda blockheads where I'm a designer for Moda fabrics. And so
Cool.
there were about 16 of us, and we each would rotate on designing a block for that week that was going into this huge sampler quilt. So I actually have this is, so like I
Yeah,
design
yeah. Let us
4
see.
of the blocks in this,
Uh-huh.
but then every week I would also sew everybody else's blocks.
Oh, cool. Oh, it's like rainbow.
Yeah, I did do this in kind of rainbow colors.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. So each one of
So
those
on something
blocks.
like this, it's really fun because there's so much of a community of people doing this on social media, and especially with what we went through with 2020 in the pandemic, you've got a lot of connection still to people that you wouldn't have other ways, and you're like working on the same kind of project, but then you're seeing like, oh, you did it in a different color scheme, you did it in different fabrics, so you did a different layout. And so it's really creative and very community building. But
Right,
that's
right.
typically the sew alongs go in some kind of social media format. And then we're all like, we're following a book or we're following a pattern and we're all like sewing the same blocks the same week or day or month.
I think that's really cool. Having a physical product is really, I think, important for us artists. I mean, you and I have some parallels. I did industrial design as an undergraduate degree and then went to 3D animation out in San Fran. And I found that in this virtual world, you didn't have this physical product that you could hold. And that
Mm-hmm.
was kind of like, really frustrating because somebody might watch what you did and would take 2 seconds and then be like, okay, next thing, next
Mm-hmm.
instant gratification. So I love that you found this world of products. What was the first product you made? What was the first thing you licensed your work onto?
It would be the greeting
Mm-hmm.
cards that I started doing for Papyrus. And just the one thing that you said about kind of working in this like computer sort of world, I think in
Mm-hmm.
a way, part of why I did enjoy transitioning to other things so much is that there was more tactile, sensation of being able to work with, whether you're doing like scrapbooking where you're
Mm-hmm.
actually working with, cut papers and, things that you're building something with your hands and it's tactile if you're a knitter. And so that's real, like I do a lot of work on the computer still. So I enjoy when I have this whole world that's like a different part of me gets, nurtured
Yeah.
by working with my hands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You find flow faster, I
Yes.
think. You find that flow
Hmm.
state, you kind of get in the zone and takes you away from everything. It's so beautiful. I know
Yes.
when I had kids and they were really young and I couldn't create, it was driving me nuts. And
Hmm.
that's why I started doing those Enso. But at the end, you also have a product as well. So you got into papyrus. How did you do that? What is the process for taking a design and licensing it to a product?
Okay. So with Papyrus specifically, I mocked up numerous card ideas and I submitted blindly to an art director there. I contacted
Yes.
the company. I said, who can I submit designs to? And I, sent her a presentation that was, I think it was about maybe 10 different card ideas. And
Okay.
from that initial presentation, they ended up picking up about 3 or 4 of them,
Sweet.
which is kind of unusual to have that kind of response right away. But I think that we just found a nice fit with each other. And then sometimes after that, they would actually contact me and say, would you be interested in, like, we need a card that's like this. Would you be interested in working on that? Would you be interested in working on ideas for gift bags and things like that? So once we had a rapport established with each other, we could kind of work on future projects together that way. But the first thing was just, me blindly like sending this stuff to the company and saying, this is who I am, this is my experience. I did these designs, and I sent them a group of designs that were not too many designs to look at, but it was more than like, oh, I have one or two ideas. It was kind of like a group of 10 or 12 things, and here's a representation of my work. So it didn't require that much of their time, but they have
Yeah.
review sessions and they look at work. A lot of these companies do that take submissions. And so a lot of times you just have to call the company and say, who should I be sending this to? And then you put it out there.
A lot of
And
them
you
have it on
just,
the internet now too, right? They have submission
yes,
guidelines out there. Now, were
yes.
all of those designs that you did, were they kind of like thematic? Did they all, were they of one collection, you know what I mean? Or were they different styles? Did you present them with different styles or kind of
But stylistically, they were more, I do a lot of different styles of artwork. And so that's always been a challenge for me to narrow
mhm.
down having these different categories. So for them, because they do tend to do some cards that are a bit more contemporary than some other companies, I sent them things that were much more uh, graphic design, modern oriented things, because I thought that was a better fit with the company. Whereas another company, I would maybe send a different group of work to that I thought would be a better fit with them. And interestingly, in that batch, I did have, I think, 3 or 4 designs that were based on the idea of like a modern interpretation of quilt designs.
Oh,
And
really?
so, and they were done graphically, but they were based on, yeah, kind of a modern interpretation of log cabin quilts and stuff. And they did end up picking up one of those for a Mother's Day card. And I I hadn't done it as a Mother's Day card. I think I had done it as a wedding card or something. I put some type on it as just a suggestion, and you let them know that you're not married to that type. You're willing to put something else on it. But I did write some sentiment that I put on things so that you got the feeling of like, where would type exist on this card? Where would it
Mm,
live?
got
How
it.
would it look? And so they said, we'd like to do this, but for a Mother's Day card, this is the copy we'd like on it. Awesome. So
Mhm.
um, so I did have a number like that. I showed them a number of Christmas card ideas,
Uh-huh.
and I think there were some birthday ideas, and they ended up picking up one as a party invitation, and they ended up also picking up a number of Christmas ideas.
Well, Christmas and birthdays are the two biggies in greeting cards, right?
Yes, and I had boxed sets on some of the cards. I've also done individual cards for the holidays, or even the money envelope cards, some of those
Right.
things. But yeah, they did. My first thing was like birthday, Christmas, and then some, I think it was wedding.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's see. Let's recap. So you A, researched the company well.
Yes.
B, made a presentation for them that showed how the work might be used, but told them very openly that you weren't married to it so
Right.
that it could be altered. And then you submitted a small enough collection that they could look at quickly and easily, but enough to show that you had some variety. I love it.
Yes.
That's pretty
Yes.
simplistic, right?
Yes. I think, if we expect an art director to look through a huge portfolio, that's not necessarily a realistic expectation, because they have a lot to do in their day and they have a lot to look at, and they might have very specific needs. So, if you can open up and have a rapport with them where you can have a conversation, and are there specific things you're looking for, you could try, I have more. If you have specific needs, I can send you more. Or, if you like a direction, I can send you some more things to look at.
Right.
It's nice to sort of open the door to more conversation so that you can find out what the needs are. Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. I work
Yes.
with a couple of art agents now, and they send trend reports and getting that feedback, that input of, okay, this is kind of what places are looking for and we want to see has been so inspirational, really, because it's like, okay, I've got something to work towards. I'm not just shooting blindly in the dark. So that conversation is really, really handy. So,
Yeah.
did you send your presentation? Like, how do you present work now? So now you're in the industry, you've got some contacts. That initial presentation was kind of a cold call type of thing, which I give you major props for. But I'm curious, like, how often do you approach new companies now, and how do you pitch that? How do you present that? Like, do you send them a slide deck, like PDF?
Mhm.
Of images with some text put in, or do you send them an email, or do you call them, or like what's your presentation
Things
techniques?
have evolved over time. I did do a number of years of exhibiting
Mm.
back when I was starting to get more into the art licensing. So I exhibited at Surtex in New York 3 times,
Oh,
where I
cool.
had a booth. And I, like my first Surtex, I started working with Design and doing greeting cards with them. Sorry, that's my dog.
That's all right. What kind of
That's
dog do you have?
and then she's a Labradoodle.
Ah, cool.
Uh, yeah, she's a good girl. She's an old girl, but she's good, and she likes to hang with me. But now she's looking out the door. Anyway, the I met people from Robert Kaufman, and so actually my first fabric was also with Robert Kaufman, who I met at a Surtex. I did things for gift bags and stuff. So
Mhm.
going to New York and having a booth and putting all your stuff up on banners, and at that point we had portfolio books that they looked through. Things hadn't really transitioned
Mhm.
to doing it all on an iPad at that point. So if I were going to meet with somebody right now, I'd be taking my iPad and I
Mhm.
would have my portfolio into categories on my iPad. At the time, we had printouts and we would send printouts of things. The first stuff I did for Papyrus, that proposal I sent them was printed out. And
Cool.
if I intended for something to be die cut, I had cut it and lifted it and done things to show it's a more three-dimensional card, something like that. But now I would show everything digitally. And I also exhibited at the Craft and Hobby Association. They had a licensing section for a while, so I did that. Then I actually worked with an agent for a while, but I still actually went to shows myself. Like sometimes
Mhm.
I did still go to Surtex to be at a meeting with the agent, with the client that I was working with. Like I started working with sellers calendars. I still work with sellers calendars. I do the Seize the Day line, and I've been doing
Cool.
this for 11 years, I think.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah, so a long time. This is like the daily format, which is one where you like tear it off each
Oh,
day.
yeah. I remember
Yeah.
those.
So if I knew the agent was going to be meeting with people from the company, I would maybe go and still be in the meeting where we would talk about how they were doing, and if we wanted to put it in a different format and things like that. And I've also been to the licensing show just to go and be in some meetings. But I would still go to the Atlanta Gift Show every January. I haven't been in a while, but because now I'm focused in other areas. But I would go to
COVID.
Atlanta every year, and I would meet with some companies for giftware, for dishware, for home decor.
Mhm.
And so my agent maybe would have set up the meeting, and I might be doing the meeting on my own or with the agent, but I would still go and have meetings there
Neat.
and do trend research and that kind of stuff. So I've done a lot of exhibiting and going to shows. And then usually, it's the same thing about, even if you're giving something to someone digitally, you don't want to overwhelm them. And sometimes editing your work is a hard thing. So I would have
Right.
some sheets that would show kind of an overview of some styles and feelings. And then that could maybe open the door to a further discussion on, oh, you like that? Okay, well, that's actually in a whole collection. Would you like to see the collection?
Right.
So, it's trying to just get that door open to have more conversation, and it can be a Zoom call, it can be over email, that type of thing. My agent had a database. I'm just independently repped now, and so I have not set up a full portfolio database of my own, because I am more about having a relationship with the company and then finding what their needs are. And then I can send them things to look at. And because I'm more narrowed down to certain areas now, that seems to work for me. And I don't know if that would work for somebody trying to get into this, but for me, it's a bit easier to manage and then know the companies I'm working with. So like I'm still working with sellers, I'm doing the calendars. And so, you know, as I'm working on things for that, I'm also showing those florals to my fabric company. And
Right.
we're figuring out if we're going to do lines from that. And so I have enough going on that I haven't needed to
Right. To
actively
pitch.
try to be pursuing other companies. Yeah.
I think that's really cool, though. You mentioned some of the biggies that we hear over and over again for getting into licensing is these conferences. And I've been to a couple, and they really are fantastic for making connections. I mean, to this day, I keep finding over and over again that networking, just meeting people and having these relationships, like you talk about, is really the most successful, the most productive thing
Hmm.
to help you find your way in this
Hmm.
art world, in this world of creativity. And you mentioned CHA, which is the Craft and Hobby Association. Their show is now named Creativation, I believe, all one word. I don't think they do licensing there anymore, though. It's just mainly
Yeah.
craft companies. But you
Yes,
could license designs to craft companies. I've
you
been to
could.
that one. Well, I Connect Crafts products, I displayed there 2 years and then made relationships with manufacturers and licensed designs to manufacturers to try and get that out there. And then you mentioned the licensing show. That one's in Las Vegas, right? And that one's more focused on licensing in the television and movie realm, right? Like it's like character licensing for use of characters from movies and TV shows onto products, right?
Yes, you do have, like, you're there with Marvel and Warner Brothers and things that had these really huge properties. And so there is a section for, art and design, but
Oh, is there?
um, I think, well, there was at the time, and I
Hmm.
think there still is. I think my feeling about it is that it's harder to become noticed at a big show like that. And a lot of things have changed because our world has changed so much. And this last year has really taught us how important it is to, be reaching out virtually to companies. It's not always about a show anymore. And there
Yeah.
are shows that still exist, but they're starting to exist in different formats.
Oh, yeah. They're
And
totally changing.
yeah, and
Um,
if I were an art director and I also am getting a lot of what I need virtually from people, I don't know if I would need to travel as much to those shows. So
Unless
it's
you enjoy
all,
it, like I do.
well,
I like going.
absolutely.
It's like a mini vacation.
And there's nothing that really compares to one-on-one, meeting with somebody. But even like we can see each other over Zoom and read each other's expressions and have a conversation. So, the technology keeps making it easier for us to connect in ways we couldn't connect before. And so
Yeah.
I think there's always going to still be this need for having one-on-one meetings and
Yeah.
conferences, but I believe that the form of them is going to just continue to keep evolving.
Oh, I totally agree. I totally agree. I
Hmm.
love your little tip about going to some of the smaller ones. And there are some new smaller ones coming up, right? So I went
Hmm.
to one near me that I'd never heard of called EluxCon and met a bunch of really great people. And that is basically focused on magic cards and D&D, and it's science fiction and fantasy illustrators that make these amazing, gorgeous works. And it was really
Hmm.
science fiction and fantasy art. And it's just this smaller conference here in Pennsylvania. And there's one in San Francisco that's focused on the greeting cards now, right? Blue something, blue.
There is a
I have to look it up.
blueprint. There's
Blueprint.
Okay, and I think they've been up in San Francisco.
Yep.
Um, but and that's where I think sometimes it's a good thing if you want to have that broad appeal of like birthdays, However, there's something really nice about having some of these more niche categories because
Hmm.
it helps you identify and have more of like a place that you could belong if you have a specific interest or style in things, and that can actually really help you. And the other,
Yeah,
in terms of
that's
like,
why I kind of asked you at the very beginning how you found your niche of quilting. And, to just bring it into focus for our listeners, Jean, one of the first interviews of the first season, Jean, she owns Charmed, I'm sure, Studios. She was talking about she found her niche making kind of she does enameling. Jewelry enameling, and she found her niche through taking workshops and just
mhm,
when you take these workshops, when you go places, when you take these workshops and you don't hold yourself above anything, it would be easy to say, oh, I only do TV, but you didn't. You were like, I'm going to go do quilting with my mom and I'm going
mhm,
to do this and I'm going to do that. And you found this niche that just
mhm.
made your heart sing, I guess.
Well, and that's at the time when I started working with Moda. I found as I was doing more licensing work that I would have a lot of collections that I would show that wouldn't necessarily be picked up by a company. Maybe they didn't need that kind, or
Hmm.
they already had that. It was tough to get continual placement on the fabric, and so I would have a lot of collections. So I wanted to put things on Spoonflower, which, if people don't know, that is a digital print on demand company that does printing onto fabric and wallpaper,
Yeah,
and
they've
also
really expanded.
gift wrap. And they will print onto, micro suede, onto flannel, onto silk. And so there's cotton, but there are also a lot of different, jersey and other substrates. So I started putting things on Spoonflower and entering their competitions. They had
Right?
design competitions every week. And so every week I would try to enter those. And then they had a big one called Fabricate. And Moda was the sponsor for that. And that had numerous rounds of designing a line and then doing coordinates with it. And it kept kind
Hmm.
of narrowing the field down with, voting and stuff. And I ended up winning Fabricate. And so
Woo, way
that
to
was,
go,
yeah,
girl.
that was how I got to work with Moda. And so I was really excited because they were like a dream company that I really wanted to work with. And so I knew they were going to produce that line for me, but there was no guarantee of another line after
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So I decided I wanted to meet with them in person. So I flew myself to Houston for Quilt Market so that I could meet with them.
Nice.
And it was
Smooth
great. And
move.
I, mhm,
That's a smooth move. I've been reading a lot about how sometimes you just have to take that initiative.
yeah,
You just have to put yourself out there and
yeah,
the shock
yes.
and awe people by showing up and being there.
Yes, I will buy a ticket. I will come and meet with you. I want to meet with you in person. And our good friend Phyllis, she was there for Quilt Market, and so she had a hotel room and said, "You can stay with me." And so I
Yeah.
went just for one night, and I had never been to the show before, which was huge, to see, and it was
Yeah.
really exciting. And so I had a great meeting with them. But when I was there, I talked with some of the other designers for Moda because they have like a designer section of their booth.
Yeah.
And Sherry McConnell from A Quilting Life had said, "Oh, are you going to be doing your own patterns with your fabric lines?" And that was the first time. I didn't know that fabric designers also designed their own quilts for their quilt patterns. And so I thought,
Surprise.
what are you talking about? And so she was so nice and so helpful and said, if you have any questions, you can call me. And like, yes, because then like Moda also has United Notions, which is a distribution, company. And so they distribute notions and patterns and things. So they'll show your patterns with your line and they'll distribute it for you, which I thought,
Which
really?
helps
And so
bolster sales.
yes. And so patterns help the sales on the fabric, and the fabric helps the sales on the patterns. So I was so excited on my plane ride back home. My brain was going like a mile a minute, just
Yeah, I
thinking,
imagine.
wait a minute. So I could really decide how I envision you using this fabric, and this is how I would make it into a quilt. So I knew enough about quilting from my mom and taking a few classes with her that I thought, well, I'm going to give this a try.
Hmm.
And that's where I had no idea that that would really change the trajectory of what I was doing, because I ended up really liking making quilt patterns. And
Right.
so when I make a quilt pattern, like I actually do produce a booklet that
Okay.
has like all the directions, it tells you like how to cut the
And there's your
fabric.
graphic design background coming in too.
This is absolutely my graphic design background coming in. And so I have an editor who goes through these. I do the layouts on them, but
Hmm.
this is probably the hardest work that I do is writing the patterns, because you really have to think about, I could be explaining this to somebody who's a very skilled quilter or somebody who is very beginner. So
Moi.
I need to be as clear as I possibly can. And so a lot of my patterns, because I didn't come from a place of I've made quilts for 20 years, I tend to try to explain things very clearly so that a more beginning person could make that.
Yeah.
And some of my patterns at this point are more complex because I've learned so much now in doing this, and some are more advanced and some are still more beginner friendly. And I try to, mark what they are, but I never expected that my work would go in that direction. And so now I actually am also a manufacturer because I make these patterns and then I sell those, and I sell them through multiple distributors, as well as doing direct to consumer sales, or sometimes I'll do wholesale to shops as well.
That's
And so
phenomenal.
that's
And
become
that
this
creates a whole nother
whole,
revenue stream, right? And it
yes,
leads us into the E, the art, product, presentation, education, because I know you teach now as well. You
I
teach how to do
do.
some of these, right? So not only do
I
you write
do.
the patterns and that
Mhm.
whole booklet, I mean, that's a form of education. I hear over and over again from a lot of our guests. A lot of our guests have books or they have courses, and that is a major contributor to success is sharing what you know, that giving.
Yes. Yes. I'm working on doing digital, like virtual, digital courses, and I'm going to be doing some virtual ones for some guilds coming up this fall. And
Hmm.
so I'm working on putting those together. One of the things that I do right now is on some of these sew-alongs, when it's your turn for the block. So for example, on Socialites, which is through the Fat Quarter Shop, and they have a Facebook page, and it's one of these things that every week a block comes out. So I'm one of the
What's it
designers.
called?
Socialites, but it's SEWCIALITES. So it's like socialites, like you would have social, but it's a SEW at the beginning.
You guys
So
will put links to that and to the
yes.
conferences we talked about down below. Check
Okay.
theartistappeals.com. The podcast page itself will put links.
Okay.
Don't let me forget.
Okay, so this is like one of the blocks. So I just did this block that's called Abundant, and it's this flower. And the block actually, like this whole area was solid, but I wanted to show, how about if you did some variations on it? So you could do patchwork squares in here. And this came in 3 sizes. And so then another thing that I did is I took 3 of the blocks to make a table runner. And so
Oh,
this
cool.
is like a 9-inch block. And
Yeah.
this I'll be quilting as a table runner for my dining room table. And so I'll do a blog post, like this particular block pattern is just one block, but you can see, you can repeat it and make things out of it. And so that's a free pattern for that block that somebody can
Okay.
go to my blog. They can, get the pattern. If they wanted to make this table runner, I've told them exactly what I've done to add the pollen dots and like the size of all this stuff. So that's like a freebie that you can go. And so I do a number of things like that. Like this is a paid for pattern, but then I have things that are like free as well. And so
Mm-hmm.
anytime you can also show somebody, this is how we could think about it another step in
Right.
terms of, adding it or changing the blocks up. Or I do things called color studies. So when I did Moda
Ooh.
blockheads, I would take a block and I would break it out into its geometric form. And then what if we played with the color placement and how different would the block look? And so I have a section of my blog where I've shown all all of the color studies on the blocks and how different they can look. And
Oh,
so
wow.
that's
And you
exercise in
sew
like,
each one of these blocks?
yes, yeah.
Wow.
So, I mean, things like that also are good ways that you can help to show somebody, how else could you see that thing?
Yeah.
So, and then I do lectures and trunk shows for guilds and shops.
Okay.
So a quilt guild might have me do a trunk show where I show, quilts that I've made, I show the fabric lines that I design, and kind of go through the whole realm with them. And that's a
Mm-hmm.
lot easier to do virtually because it's hard to, put 50 quilts into suitcases and, travel with that. So, driving
But you don't just
distance is,
sling them over your shoulder?
it's, if I'm driving distance, I can take, a good 50 quilts and
Wow.
do, an hour trunk show where, I explain the different things on them and show them with their fabric lines and stuff. And so the lecturing part is actually really fun to do that. And then oftentimes we do a workshop with that where it'll be like a day's class where we're working on one of the quilts and you're going through the steps on making it.
Mm-hmm.
And people just like to get together and sew together. So it's a really
Yeah.
social activity.
Yeah, it's
So
those
it's not that
connections
I'm,
again.
yes. So it's not that I'm like the biggest expert in sewing, but I have more of a designer's perspective. And so I can share that.
And it sounds like by doing all this, you're creating a ton of content as well. So educating really creates content that you can then repurpose and share out, which brings us to automation. And how do you do it all? How do you automate? What do you automate? What do you are there any apps you use or any favorite tips or tricks or anything like that? Because it sounds like you are making so much stuff between these color blocks and the quilt patterns and all this stuff. Like, how do you stay on social media, not get overwhelmed, and share all this with everybody? What are your favorite tips and
Um,
tricks?
yeah, the last month I've been a little spottier on Instagram just because I've had a lot of deadlines. So I've let it slip a little bit, but I usually try to post on Instagram every day.
Hmm.
And
You just do it
I
from your
do,
phone? You just take a picture and
I usually take pictures and then do it from my phone. Sometimes I'll go through and kind of format things and like
mhm.
label them and get them more ready too. I do also try to post every single day at least 4 to 5 images to Pinterest,
Oh,
because
okay.
it's a huge, search engine. And so when I do a blog post, I'm really trying to share the information that I'm doing on my blog through Pinterest. And so I do use Tailwind as an app for scheduling Pinterest.
Oh, I've heard of it.
I Tailwind is great, and I haven't delved into some of the things like you can do smart loops and other things. So I need to kind of take that the next step. But right now, I am using that for scheduling, and so they will look also at your kind of who's following you and when are they online. So they will have recommended times like this is the best time for you to be
Yeah.
posting, and they'll put it into that schedule for you,
Yeah,
and
and
then
they
you
have a
can kind of
posting
just
calendar if I recall too. I haven't used it in a long time, but I used to use it. But it'll like has like a calendar and you can put your post in, right? But what's a
yes,
smart loop? That's the second time I've heard that term come up, but I haven't
it has
heard it
It
a
has
lot.
to do, so Tailwind has a thing where, if a block or a post is doing well,
Hmm.
you might want to pin it again. Let's say
Okay.
it's 6 months later, you might want to pin it again. And so it will do things that it will pin again for you to keep your feed, active. Or let's say I am doing quilts for Christmas time and people get started on Christmas quilts in the summer. Because if they're going to have someone long arm it for them, they need to get it to them. They get filled up before the holidays. So a lot of people start making their Christmas quilts in, May, June, July. And in fact, I just
Huh.
saw an ad from a company today saying, if you want to get your Christmas box of our Christmas goodies for sewers, you need to reserve it now. And I thought it's April, but they have to know how many of these boxes they're making to send out to people so they can start sewing
Okay.
in the summer. So
Okay.
but that's the type of specific thing that I could say, I want you to repin every May some of these Christmas quilts. Like I could decide that, I know people are starting to think about Halloween in such and such a month. So do I have Halloween projects? Things like that. And so it will then start doing that for me every year at that time. And so
Oh.
there are things that you can tell it to do that you want it to do as a reoccurring schedule theme at a specific time, or it's based on popularity. So there are a couple different ways you can do it, but it's a tailwind feature that will do repinning for you.
That's really cool. Meet Edward does something similar to that. They have a queue, the English word for a line, and the queue can be recycled. You can put things so that it keeps going back and back. And you can
Mhm,
have things that only post once, or you can have things that post over and over again, and it'll pull from that. So that's really cool.
mhm.
I'm gonna have to look into that. I stopped
Yeah.
using Pinterest very much, but I really should get back into it. So,
And I've also used Planoly.
oh, yeah.
For
That one's
Instagram,
for, yeah.
I haven't used that lately just because when I pin to interest, I have it feed directly to Facebook. And if I use Planoly, it's not feeding that way. So it's
Oh,
only going one place. So I actually stopped using that. But that was nice because for a while I was also pre-pinning and planning out Instagram, but now it's more of a habit because I also find that I do need to spend some time each day interacting with people and responding to comments and looking and making comments myself because, this is part of the community. This is part of,
yeah.
reaching people, and you want to see what they're doing and you want to respond and have a two-way dialogue. So if Pinterest is not as much dialogue, whereas as Facebook and Instagram have more dialogue with them. And
Yeah.
so I tend to do those more in real time so that I can have that kind of interaction.
Right.
And then Pinterest, I use the scheduler for. And in terms of I'm also using Trello
Okay.
right now for trying to organize my brain and my life and my projects. And I started using that because Moda was using it. And so that was a really good way of communicating with them on, when there are certain deadlines of, I have to have photos in for marketing, and, I have to have my pattern specifications in, I need to have images in for a catalog. Okay, now it's, a design review time for the next line. There are all this cycle of things. And when I'm doing a fabric line, there's one fabric line that's selling in the stores, another fabric line that's going to be shipping soon that's been produced, another one that's at the mill being done, and then I should be designing another one.
Wow.
So there's always about 4 lines in a variety of stages.
Mm-hmm.
And so they started using Trello to keep track of things and communicate with people. And I found that's a really nice
Yeah.
software, and I'm liking that
Yeah.
a lot.
That's quite the system, having 4 lines going from being designed to in production to going out on the shelves to what's currently out. And
Mhm.
there's all sorts of different things that go along with that, right? From
Yeah.
promotion to design. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a lot to
Yes.
keep track of.
It is. And so, like, for example, even like this is my Solana line. It's a line based on sunflowers. This is in
Ooh,
shops right now. And then this is cottage blue. And so this has
so pretty.
hydrangeas. And this is going to be
Ooh.
shipping next month.
I
Is
love
actually the month
hydrangeas and blues.
it's been fun to work with. And then I have a line of basics called Batched that has like a little texture on it. And we just put out a new group of colors to make it a bigger collection so like there's 76 colors now of Thatched. And so that just came out. So with all of these lines too, I'm doing new patterns to show with each of them. So
Wow.
then on the new patterns, I'm also trying to show if this is what a pattern looks like in this fabric line, well, I can mock it up on the computer in another fabric line, or here's what it looks like in all thatched, as more modern looking and things. So there are a lot of things going back and forth that I'm trying to do to stay within those timelines.
Wow, really cool. So that brings us to licensing and contract terms. I always like to touch on this because a lot of people
Yes,
are intimidated by
yes,
licensing and contracts. And of course, the number one tip we always hear is read them. But
yes.
yours are probably a little bit different with fabric lines because you're talking about like a fabric line is composed of multiple designs. Like, how does that work? How does the licensing and contract work in the fabric and quilting world? Can you give us some examples or some things to look for, or maybe special terms just defined in plain English?
Um, most of the I don't know about fabric companies that do, let's say, upholstery fabric or different kinds, and also the
Right.
fashion industry, fabric for the fashion industry, a lot of times they will buy outright a
Okay.
design as opposed to licensing it. And
Okay.
the problem with selling a design outright is, you want it to be a license because you want to be able to put that artwork on another product. So
Right.
if I sell a design outright, then I can't use it for something else. Whereas, I might have my sunflowers on Solana, and guess what? The sunflowers are also on my calendar. and I can put those sunflowers on coasters and all these different things. So you
Yeah,
do
and
want
make
to,
more money that way. Maria Brophy was on here and she gave an example of a piece of artwork of her husband's little tiny 8 by 10 painting. She's licensed it to so many different categories. She swears, she told me that it's earned them, not raised them, earned them $250,000, one piece of artwork just because it hit.
Mhm.
So, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah,
Um,
it can have, I can't exactly tell you why. There are some things that, are not going to sell as much. And then every so often you do have something that just sells more than you thought it could have. And so you're surprised, and we don't always know what it is. But that's why you just keep producing things.
right.
So yeah, you want to, also fabric companies can vary in, some will keep reprinting a line and some print it one printing and then we move on to the next one.
Okay.
And most of them are going to print a line once and move on to another line. So some of the really big names in the quilting fabric world, like, Kay Fawcett, he does these gorgeous, huge florals in these like jewel tones. He's a British designer, I think,
Cool.
and he might be Scottish. But
Don't
his
let
fabric,
them hear you mess it up.
yeah, I know. I'm so sorry. I used to call him Cafe, and I'm like, no, it's Cafe. So at least I've learned something. Oh, I'm getting low battery again too.
Oh, well,
So
quick,
I'm,
let's finish up. So,
yes. So anyway, they will reprint his lines over and over and over again. Most people don't have that situation. Most people are going to get one printing and then you move on to the next thing. So you do want to know, and ask the company, are you going to do multiple prints? And they probably can't tell you that unless they know how it sells. You are going to be paid in fabric according to a price per yardage.
okay,
So, you might get 8 cents a yard or 10 cents a yard or something like that. And
interesting.
that's pretty typical for that industry, is that you're paid by the yardage.
That's
And
interesting because
if
it's
you
unique.
are if you are in a chain store, like, and you want to know, is your fabric only sold to high-end quilt shops, or are they also selling to, let's say, more mass market chains like Joann's and Michael's, or even something like Walmart will have a fabric section sometimes. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do mass market, because you can make really big numbers with mass market. The quality of the fabric will be a little less because it's a lower price point, and that's
Hmm.
okay. You have to decide if that's right for your brand or not. But you will get less money per yard, but you might sell more volume.
Right.
So it's just a different model. So you do want to know, what are your selling channels? Are you
Uh-huh.
selling, chain? Are you selling only specialty? Do you do other substrates? Like, do you do home decor or things like that? Because if they want the right to put that on, maybe they make other products. You might need that defined. Like, you might have a contract with another company that does home goods. So you need to make sure in a contract, if they want to do it on a product other than the type of fabric substrate you're talking about, that you have to give them written permission to add it to another product category. They can't just add it to something else. So you want your terms defined as tightly as possible. And if they think they might want to do it on something else, they need your written approval so you don't have a conflict with other contracts.
Right.
You know,
Great
you,
tip.
you don't want that to happen. So
Right.
that's, and yes, read
You
the
can put that right
contracts
in the
and know
contract.
if there's like, can they just print it in perpetuity forever? Is there a time when it ends? If it does end, what's the selling off period that they would do, that you would know this, you have to be done paying me by X time. What if
Okay.
they sell fabric at a discount? What do you get? Some of those things.
Very good. Very good. So duration, products. What was the sell off? I've never heard of that term before, I don't think.
It doesn't happen as much in fabric. It's more with publishing, but let's say you have fabric that normally sells for a certain price per yard and it's on sale. And so now they are, selling it at a reduced price. Am I still making my same yardage price per yard, or is
Got it.
my price reduced if now you had to like sell it really discounted?
Got it.
And
Got it.
so I want to know if I get my money right when you put in your order for the yardage, or if I'm getting my money once it sells.
Right. Okay. Good tip. Good tip. Finally, on to success. S for success. How do you measure success and how do you celebrate it, Robin? Because so many of us just keep going and going and going, and we don't take time to stop and say, oh, yeah, I did something good. Let's
Yeah.
celebrate. How do you
I
measure it?
think
How do you celebrate it?
Yeah, I don't maybe stop and celebrate as much as I should, but what I find is that, I have a couple really close friends who kind of know this world that I'm in, and they might be in it in some way of their own. Plus my husband, who's also a broadcast designer, and then he will now help me on some things on my business, like on a day off, he'll cut fabric for kits for me and things like that. He's
Love it.
super supportive and super helpful. So for me, if I have something really good that happens, I'm able to share that with them.
Hmm.
And they know what all went into having that good thing happen. So it's kind of like having the right support group too, that like they share in your successes. That's important. And then I think there's always like this sense of like creatively, am I feeling fulfilled and really happy
Mm,
with what I'm doing, which I do feel. And so I feel very successful on that level. And then there is a monetary component that is, am I making enough money that I am feeling like my company is expanding and growing in a sane way where
mm,
like I'm happy with the what I put out for what I'm getting back. And
hmm.
so, we want to have financial success that makes us feel good about what we're doing. And then we can always look at what we're making and say, well, if the digital download product of that can keep paying me, like let's say, I have a print pattern, but I also sell it in a digital PDF version, like I'm not having to print more patterns for that. So maybe I should put more time into marketing even older patterns because they can still sell in a digital PDF. So I think we have to kind of look at what is working for us and how do we do more of that. And that means taking a step back and sometimes really looking at the numbers and saying like, maybe I love doing this, but this is financially a area that's working out better, so should we beef up that part more? So you kind of do have to, part of celebrating success is taking a step back and actually really looking at your numbers so
Yeah.
that you really see what is working for you as opposed to
Right.
you working for it.
Great
So
advice. Do you do
that's
that
that's the important
annually?
part.
Like around
I
tax
would
time?
I probably do. Well, I do that at tax time. Tax time is always like an eye opener because you might
Oh,
think like, oh, I really didn't know like how much am I making in this area versus this area until I sit down and I do those tax numbers. But I
right.
kind of roughly go over things about once every 6 months
Oh,
to
nice.
take a look at that. Yeah, I
How do
try
you
not to
track
let it
it?
build.
You just use a spreadsheet or what do you track in? Use
I
QuickBooks or?
I I put well, I have an accountant that does, the accounting for our taxes. And so I what I do though is I have everything that I put into an Excel spreadsheet that breaks down all my categories. I'm like, what are my supplies? What's my equipment? What are if I've had travel for shows, if all these different things.
Wow.
And so I try each month to put in what my purchases were for business and that kind of stuff so that at the end of the year I'm able to give him the what is the money in, what's the revenue, and what are the expenses. And so I used to leave it all for like one time and it was really overwhelming. So now I'm trying to update the spending part of it. I'm trying to update at the end of every month.
Brilliant. That is really great advice. I need to get that organized. I'm I'm super impressed.
It's tough because I used to leave my
Yeah.
invoicing too, and now when I fill a distributor order, I have to invoice it that night.
Yeah.
And so and so sometimes I have nights where like I'm not going to bed till 11:30 at night because I'm still doing paperwork, and that is part of what I'm needing to do, and hopefully I'll be able to like hand some of that over to my husband at some point.
Nice. Well,
It'd
it's
be
part of the
nice.
job, right? If you want to have a real business, you have to have real numbers
Yeah.
and but it can
And
be scary.
the flip side of that is my daughter comes in for the weekend and I can say, well, I'm taking 2 days off and I don't have to ask anybody. So
Nice.
it works both ways. Mhm.
Fantastic. Well, Robin, thank you so much. You have given us so much great information, and I really have enjoyed hearing about the fabric and quilting market because it's something totally unique and new. I have never made a quilt. In fact, I used to fight and swear at my sewing machine. I still fight and swear at it. Um, I think the first time I've successfully made something was when COVID forced me to make masks for the kids. And oh man, was I cussing at this thing. So I give you
And then you went
props.
to Old Navy and you said, "Oh, I could have bought those for $4 a piece," you know. So yeah.
We try and do something nice, and then the kids are probably like, "Oh, I want that one with the baseball on it."
Yeah, no, and the with COVID and people making masks, it actually has really encouraged people to going back to sewing as an activity. So that's been a really nice thing that's happened from it.
Yeah.
And I had plenty of cursing and screaming at my mom's sewing machine when I was growing up and learning on it. So I totally understand that. And when something clicks, it clicks, and
Yeah.
it's hard to
Yeah.
say when that happens.
Well, I love fabric. It's beautiful, but I've never been able to, you know, I didn't learn it. So, well, thank you so much. Maybe I'll bust out my machine. I got to make a couple new masks for my kid because he keeps chewing them. He's chewed a hole through both of
Wow,
them, the
must be
inner lining.
tasty.
I don't know. He's
That's
9.
great. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was really nice to
Thank
talk to
you.
you. It's just an enjoyable way to spend
Yeah.
a little time. I love connecting.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. Thank you. Remind me, I will put links to everything down below. Robin, send me your assets. Send me lots of pictures, and we want to see what you're making and what you're up to. We'll put links to everything down below. Check it out, guys. And
Great.
thank you. Thank you
Thanks,
for being on the
Erin.
Artist Appeals. See you guys.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
Robin. Later.